Welcome to the all-new Running Tales podcast. I'm Craig Lewis.
And I'm Michelle Lewis.
Shall we ever listen to the official blurb?
Hi, my name is Michelle Lewis. 10 years ago, you'd have been lucky to see me run to the end of the road. These days, running is second nature to me. From marathons to park runs to putting my own running group through their paces. You'll often see me in suitably loud attire, getting ready to pound the pavements. And here's a secret. If I can do it, you can too. There's so many wonderful and inspiring stories in the world of running. And not just running, some of my favourite tales involve those who take to their wheelchairs, bikes or simply their own trusty feet in an attempt to get fitter, faster or just have some fun. In this podcast, I'm going to be in conversation with some of the most inspiring and fascinating of these people. Remember, it's your time, your speed, your way. The only person you need to keep up with is yourself.
Hi, it's Craig again this week. Welcome back to the Running Tales podcast. And I've been speaking to a man who at just 26 has already become an expert in overcoming challenges. Alex Staniforth is a record-breaking adventurer, a motivational speaker, author, mental health ambassador, and an ultra runner. His incredible story is tinged with sadness, having been part of and survived two of the biggest disasters in Mount Everest history while he was still a teenager. I asked him how he had first set out on a path truly less travelled.
I was never your typical runner. You know, when I was at school, I wasn't sporty or active. In fact, I hated sport. I was the typical kid that came second to last at sports day. Very far cry from where I am now. I think now I would describe myself as an adventurer and an ultra runner, because for me, it's about going to the adventurous places as well. I've done a lot of trips abroad. I've been in the Himalayas 5 times, which is a real privilege. And I've used running more on a day-to-day basis to begin with, more from a general well-being perspective and just to really enrich my life. I didn't take it that seriously until I was a bit older, but I think I started running when I was about, I'm trying to think now. I mean, I'm 26 now, so not that long ago, but my first ever run was when I was on holiday in France with my dad and my stepmom. My dad was a marathon runner. He'd ran London a few times and, you know, he was really fit. And for me, I just never got the appeal at all of that. You know, as I said, I hated sport at school. But my stepmom put a €2 bet that I couldn't go for a run with my dad and keep up. And I was about 13 at this point. So when you're that age, you know, €2 is a lot of money. So I wanted that €2. And I think I only just discovered the outdoors at this point, as a way of dealing with all my epilepsy, my stammer, the bullying, the anxiety, and all these things that I had growing up. So I rose to the challenge. And I don't know how far we ran. It probably wasn't even a 5K. I wheezed and whinged and moaned and everything else, but I got round. I happily bought a pan of chocolate with my earnings. I think food and running go really well together, but actually it was that case of raising the bar, you know, for the first time, and to realize when you can do something, you then want the next challenge, and then you go through this process of raising the bar. So my next one was, it was not long after then I entered a 10K race, which I saw advertised in my local village. And I think after that, I caught the bug. You know, I kept on raising the bar, entering half marathons and marathons. And while my friends are being kicked out of pubs for being underage, I was being kicked out of half marathons for being underage, which I'll admit now in public. But I just fell in love with it, really. And it really became key to me maintaining my mental and physical health and now fitness. My whole life was built around adventure and fitness. My journey completely changed when I got depression when I was about 16. And then I threw myself into running more and more, you know, as a way of coping with that and taking it a lot more seriously and racing at a reasonable level. And I had big ambitions for that. Then I got injured. And in that time, you know, my mental health went even further down the hill. And in the background, and this is kind of a confusing combination, climbing Everest had been my goal since I've been about 14, after going on my first hill walk in the lakes. Running was kind of a side project at this point. But then Everest suddenly became my focus while I couldn't run. And And over the next 4 years, I was putting steps in place. I climbed Mont Blanc in the Alps when I was 17, climbed in the Himalayas and a 7,000 meter peak. And now I guess Everest became the end goal. I threw myself into that instead. Went to Everest in 2014 and 15 when I was 18. First year, we got stopped by a huge avalanche, which killed 16 people. The following year, we were on the mountain when the earthquake hit Nepal, and got stuck on the mountain for 2 days. And sadly, 3 of our team weren't so lucky. And I guess after all that, I then fell back into running, as a way of processing all this trauma. I guess since then, I've gravitated more towards UK-based challenges and ultra endurance. And then I started chasing road marathons, got injured again, another mental health journey started. And I think since then, I moved to the lakes in 2019, and now I've become obsessed with running in the hills, ultras, and just trying to raise the bar to a whole new level. So that's kind of an overview. Hopefully it makes some sense.
No, that's a fantastic overview, and I think a couple of really good points there. I mean, not least how important food is when running as well, because I know we like to enjoy a little Sunday run and then make sure there's a cake at the end of it. It always gets you going, doesn't it? But I'm interested in looking in a bit deeper, maybe on some of the running and mental health things that you mentioned, because I know that's a big thing for you. But you mentioned that one of the things that inspired you to do a bit more running when you first started was overcoming some sort of issues you had with epilepsy and a stammer, I think you said, when you were really much younger. Are you able to sort of say a little bit more about those challenges?
Yeah. So to skip back, I had a pretty normal start in life. I was brought up near Chester. Parents gave me everything I needed. But then I was about 9 years old when I was diagnosed with a mild form of epilepsy. And although that itself was soon brought under control, it was really just a catalyst for a whole host of challenges, anxiety and panic attacks from having the seizures, made me very health conscious as well, which kind of linked into running as well. I've had a stammer ever since I've been able to speak, despite now speaking for a living. As a professional speaker, I still struggle with a stammer on a day-to-day basis. Being badly bullied, which just shattered my self-confidence and my self-esteem. And so the thought of using the outdoors never really added up originally, but I think it suddenly became this way of proving myself wrong and proving all the bullies wrong. It gave me the confidence and self-esteem that I never had, and almost this safe space. When I was out on the trails or cycling around the forest or climbing, or I kept wanting to try the next outdoor thing. It was somewhere where I belonged, and I wasn't afraid to be different. And for me, the opposite of depression is expression. And this was how I expressed myself and really found myself, and I'm so grateful for all these challenges because they've set me on this path, really. And kind of ironically, almost, most of my mental health struggles have been triggered by injuries where I've lost that escape, and I've realized it's kind of my medication. When I don't take it, you get side effects. And that's the thing. Running is the best sport in the world until you can't do it. And so I guess that's how originally it started. It gave me that sense of purpose, really, and it's now an absolutely fundamental part of my life. No matter what else is going on, everything else can be going great, but if I can't get that release, then it's a real struggle.
It's incredible how many people we've spoken to on Running Tales who have similar stories, and people who I've just spoken to in everyday life who will say, if my wife will certainly say, if I've gone a few days without running, she can tell how much more grumpier I am, sort of thing. We've also spoken to people on the podcast who've had situations where their mental health has led them down a path into crime and stuff like that. And since they've started running, they don't have those problems anywhere near to the same degree. And Michelle, my wife, spoke to somebody who had problems with alcoholism, which again, when he started running, he kind of swapped that it's almost like swapping that one addiction for another sometimes.
Definitely, that's a really interesting point, because I've often reflected on this. In some ways, running can kind of be like a form of punishment, a bit of self-harm. And I know people think that, it doesn't make sense that we would choose to go and run 100 miles and run till the point of throwing up, and all the joys of ultra running and even marathons and any running length. When we're pushing ourselves, it can people who aren't runners don't understand it, why we would enjoy doing that. And then you do a marathon, you say never again, and then suddenly you've entered another one. I think it does have the possibility of being, it can become an unhealthy relationship, you know, and I've certainly been at that point with running before, but on the whole, it's a massively positive part of, you know, of my life and well-being. It's just striking a healthy balance with that and learning to enjoy it for, you know, just what it is. But yeah, I think I've certainly been in that position a few times, especially around, you know, around food, where I've kind of been, you know, running just to eat, and obviously that isn't sustainable when you get injured either. You know, it for me, it's just a different form of expression, and you know, it's probably the most healthiest one I've found so far.
Yeah, definitely, and presumably that was part of your thinking. These sort of discussions when you formed Mind Over Mountains, which is I think one of your ways of looking into this whole mental health issue.
Yeah, so I guess with my various peaks and troughs, as I call them, the outdoors always became my therapy. You know, after Everest, you know, after being in the avalanche and the earthquake, you know, at 19, that's quite a lot of trauma to process. And naturally, I threw myself into more challenges and more fundraising, and then writing my first book, and just try to turn this tragedy into something positive. You know, how could I build something better? But I think, like with running, you know, Everest became my kind of identity. You know, for 4 years, I've worked towards it, and in the grand scheme, it's not a long time, but it is, you know, relatively speaking. And so I was kind of a bit lost, you know, and that loss of identity, that loss of purpose to get out of bed in the morning is the hardest part. But running gave me that purpose. Even just entering some races and things gives you a training plan. It gives you something to progress, a sense of achievement. And so I guess in that time, although I did go through the kind of conventional therapy as well, I had counselling and, you know, antidepressants and all the kind of conventional stuff. That definitely helped me to get to that baseline of where I needed to be. But ultimately, the outdoors was instant. You know, it was always there for me to give me that perspective and everything else. And I'm not saying it's a miracle cure at all. For me, mental health is always there, but it's about a tool of managing things. And for me, it's the most powerful tool there is. So after Everest and after an expedition in the Himalayas in 2016, and unsurprisingly, I didn't reach the top of that one either. I then decided to take on a challenge inspired by Elise Downing, who ran around the coast of the UK back in 2016. To kind of think of what I could do close to home. And so in 2017, I took on a challenge climbing to the highest points of all the counties in the UK. So all 100 counties, cycling, running, walking, kayaking, about 5,000 miles in 72 days. And that was like my whole new Everest. It was the biggest thing I'd ever done at the time. And completely opened my eyes as to what we have here on our home soil to enjoy, and just the power of, you know, putting our hand up first and getting people to be part of that conversation. But what really struck me from that journey was it took me longer to get an appointment, you know, for my depression and bulimia than it did to cycle 5,000 miles around the UK. And that was quite a worrying prospect, really. So off the back of that challenge, I was then invited to lead an event in the Lake District by a group called Adventure Uncovered, which is all around promoting the benefits of hill walking for mental health. So naturally, I kind of got involved with that and wanted to make it so much bigger than just a weekend of walking, because we know it helps, but how do you give people lasting change and lasting tools? So I brought in a coaching friend and a mentor who delivered, you know, life coaching. We had, you know, counseling, inspirational speakers, bits of mindfulness, and just giving people that chance to walk and talk in a safe space with like-minded people. There's something magic about being outside, whether it's running with somebody or talking on a hill. It's easier to open up and connect with people. And that weekend in the lakes was just, it was absolutely mind-blowing, just the impact it made. So off the back of that, we decided to do more of those events and set up Mind of Mountains as a charity in 2020. So that has kind of become my legacy, but I didn't plan to do it so young. But the demand we've seen in the pandemic especially has never been greater. So yeah, that now is giving people the tools it's given me, I guess.
I was going to say exactly that the pandemic was something that really
we were all suddenly walking around and discovering our local areas and local parks and so on, and partly because there was nothing else to do, but partly because it helps us cope with, potentially something that was the biggest mental health crisis we've had for decades, because it was all so unprecedented, and getting out there with nature really helped people through that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure we can all recall those days when everybody was walking and trying to stay 2 meters apart and walking in the paths in the middle of the road just to try and avoid each other. And I think what I remember from that period, I mean, I'm very lucky that I moved in the South Lakes about 3 years ago. So I'm just in Kendal, and I could have been in a better place and felt more grateful for that. But I remember going on my evening runs along the trails nearby and in the forests, and there was just this sense of calm. When you're in nature was business as usual. It was just us that were all in chaos. And that sense of calm and perspective, it just kind of gave me hope. That we were going to get through this, things were going to get better. And nature has that effect of just taking us back into the moment and reconnecting on what's important. And I know if I'd not been able to get out and run like I could, it would have been a completely different experience. I'm sure many of us can relate to that. It was also the year when that summer people were breaking records every single day. It was unbelievable. And I think when we're forced to do things differently, it inspires new ideas. It brings out the best in all of us. So I think though it's more the what's next. When people are living in that survival mode for 2 years and beyond, we're yet to see the effects of that. I mean, I caught COVID after swerving it for over 2 years. I finally caught it about 6 weeks ago. Unfortunately, 2 days after a 100-mile run, and the combination of the two, I wouldn't recommend. So even though we feel like we're out of the pandemic and we're living as we used to be, the damage, we're yet to see all of it, because it's knocked me for 6. And I've had it mildly compared to some. So I don't think we're yet to see that, the full effects of that. And the time for nature, where we really have an opportunity to help people access that as a natural intervention, because the demand for support is completely going to outstrip what's available at the moment. So I think this needs to fill a gap.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's going to be something that we're going to be talking about for the next 5-10 years, if not beyond. Particularly when you look at children coming through school who've had their education so deeply affected. I just want to get back on the sort of adventurer thing quickly. I mean, is Everest still a name for you, or is that door closed now?
I mean, I'm too young to say never, and it was such a part of my life and such a driver for so long. But the main thing I've learned from that journey, I mean, not just the fact that so much in life is out of our control, and doesn't matter how hard you work and how hard you train, stuff's going to happen. But actually, Everest was actually not the end goal. It was just a step on the journey. Success to me now is less about the outcome and more about the process. And I realized on my third trip, this was on to a peak in Tibet in 2016, that I didn't really have anything to prove anymore. I remember seeing Everest across the plateau in Tibet, and there was just no feeling anymore. There was no visualization. There was no desire. That's the sort of vision you have when you enter a race, and you obsess about it for weeks or even months. And I obsessed about this mountain for so long, but that wasn't there. And you need that commitment. You need that level of sacrifice and desire for when things get tough. And Everest had given me so much more. It gave me the chance to start speaking, to write 2 books, to start a charity, to travel. But I think most importantly, to understand just how fragile life really is. And I've been able to find that same level of challenge through running instead. And so I can't say never, but life's so busy now with other things that are equally challenging that I don't know when the time or opportunity will come back, but we'll have to see, really. I mean, I think I've always been really bad at altitude, and younger people do tend to struggle more. So I would like to go back sort of 10 years later with everything I've learned since, and the kind of endurance I've built from running in the mountains and the lakes, and just see how much differently, how differently I would perform.
Yeah, and well, I think it's a pretty incredible adventure already, even if you were to never to return there, and obviously tinged with that kind of life-changing incident as well. So I don't think anyone's looking at you saying you've definitely got to go back there or anything. I just want to touch now a bit more on the running and where you are with that now. A lot of us give up, and not give up, but don't go any further than the 5K at a park run or a half marathon or a marathon. What made you sort of go, well, do you know what? Actually, I want to do an ultra. I want to be an ultra runner.
I think just to start by saying that's perfectly fine. Running, whether it's 5K, whether it's a marathon or whatever. If you lose the enjoyment and the reason you run, then I think we've already lost. I think that's the most important thing. But for me, naturally, I've always been, ingrained the way to keep wanting to push the bar, to discover what else I can do. And I never even thought about doing an ultra marathon. I even a couple of years ago, it didn't even enter my head. But I think, like anything, when you stretch yourself, within that threshold, it just gives you that confidence just to push a little bit more and see what happens and just test the water. And I think originally I said I started in kind of road racing, 5K, 10K, half marathon. And yeah, I think I was more obsessed around chasing the times and trying to get better and joining a club and just enjoying the journey, really. I think I entered a marathon because I wanted to sort of tick the box. My dad had done them as well. But I think I always said, though, I didn't want to run a marathon until I knew I could run sub-3. It was just that kind of arbitrary number. So I did my first official marathon in 2018 at Manchester. And then I did Chester later that year. And that year I was working on my second book. So I had a lot of free time to train. My whole daily routine was just write the book, run, basically. Probably the closest I'll ever get to any professional athlete kind of lifestyle, but just without the same standard of performance. And I think with the marathons, I love the training, I love the whole journey of having the race and the build up. But then I'd also, again, I was in a bit of an unhealthy relationship with food and running at the time. The end of that year, after Chester Marathon, after a year of hitting PBs in every distance and racing the best I'd ever done, I hit another kind of mental health trough. I got injured again after Chester Marathon and then didn't run properly for 6 months. I did London Marathon that following year, but this was obviously just getting back off my injury and, after a period of recovery. And I obviously abandoned any chance of PBs and times. And actually, I was trying to break the Guinness World Record for the fastest marathon dressed as a logo. Because I thought, well, I'm not going to get a time I'm going to be proud of, so why not turn it into something positive, And in the end, Guinness World Records didn't accept my costume, which was this green, white shade triangle, because I'm an ambassador for the Youth Hostel Association.
Yeah.
But I thought, well, sod it, I'm just going to run it anyway in this big green triangle thing. And it wasn't my fastest marathon by any means, but it was the most fun I've ever had in a marathon, because you've got everyone in London screaming, come on Quality Street, come on Triangle. And that race for me really reignited that love for running and just what it's all about. After that, yes, I did get back into racing and chasing targets, but then I moved to the lakes that year. So suddenly my whole running environment changed. I've got new routes to explore. And suddenly from being, reasonable in the pack at road races, you get to fell races and suddenly I'm at the back, getting absolutely overtaken by everybody because it's just a different sport. And so I've been kind of finding my feet again, really, since then. In 2020, I did probably undoubtedly my toughest challenge, which was on the National Three Peaks. So I think I was looking for something big after climbing the UK, and I hadn't done anything sort of for 3 years. And I just know with time that I'm missing something. I'm missing a project. And after various mental health challenges and moving up here and all that, it was time. But I was looking for what's different, what hasn't been done before. I'm not too interested in just entering races and trying to break FKTs. I'm more interested in going off a conventional path. I think because I've always been like that with my challenges in school and things. So I came up with the 3 peaks, but it's not just climbing Ben Nevis, Scarford, Pike and Snowdon as you know it, but running the entire distance between them. Right. So that's 450 miles or 70 marathons in 9.5 days. I think I came across that from the guy who did it before me called Tom Mountney. But other than that, not many people had really tried it, unsurprisingly. And for me, it just ticked the boxes. It was UK based, it was human powered, it played to my strengths of running in the hills and running far. But by that point, I'd actually only ran one ultramarathon before. I ran a 35 miler on my birthday. And so suddenly I set myself a challenge to run 50 miles a day for 9 days. That time I had definitely thrown myself in the deep end. With a challenge, you're looking for, that stretch between, okay, a bit scary, a bit uncomfortable, but feeling achievable. This was right at the bottom end. But I kind of, once I commit, once I put it out there, once I make that accountable, I got to do it. But there was this real feeling of, who on earth do I think I am? Because all the proper ultra runners were like taking notice and saying, wow, this is mega. And I'm thinking, what do they know that I don't know? Luckily, the pandemic came along and gave me more time to train. But that for me was what really got me into ultra running, by setting that massive step. I'd only ran 47 miles once before doing the challenge and training. So I learned a hell of a lot on that 9.5 days. But I got through it, and I think that has now raised the bar to a whole new level. So I didn't actually race an ultra till last year. I did the Cumbria Way Ultra and then the Bob Graham Round. And so now it's like there's a great community. I've got to decide between racing or creating my own bizarre challenges, really. But for me, it's about the fundraising for charity. And to do that, I have to think of crazy ideas.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first of all, your story about the logo reminds me of a very traumatic experience at about mile 20 of the Milton Keynes Marathon, where a giant giraffe came jogging past me. But I refuse to let it beat me. I took the giraffe back.
I think a few people will probably credit me for PBs that day because they didn't want to beat the triangle. I was quite impressed. I think I got round in 3:14, I think, with that triangle. But I very happily gave it back to them. I've never ran with it since. Yeah. And I think it's just been since moving up here, running in the fells, although it's not, I've lost my road speed. It's just, I've just fallen in love with the process of being in the fells, and it's magical. And now to combine that with racing and challenges is just the perfect combo, really. But I still see myself as an amateur very much. I'm not racing at any serious level, but I'm just loving being in the fells at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I thought was interesting that you mentioned was that sort of idea of no idea whether I'm going to be able to do this challenge or not, because actually that's something where we've spoken to people like I don't know if you know of Rob Pope, who sort of did this ridiculous Forrest Gump challenge, but he said, he said that obviously he had the aim and it was in his head, but I'm not really sure from speaking to him and reading his book whether he ever thought he was actually going to do it. And it does seem to be a bit of the thing. It's just this crazy idea. And then it's like almost like you said, I've committed now, so I'm going to have to do it.
Yeah, Rob's a great friend and big inspiration of mine actually as well. And I think to do anything, out of the ordinary, I think you have to push yourself into that place of the unknown, because when you're entering races and things, that doesn't take away from the achievement at all, but you know that you're not the only one. Whereas when you're breaking new ground to do something that crazy, you are into unknown territory. And apart from Tom Mountney and Jamie Ramsey, I didn't really know anybody else who'd done it, so there's not a lot of people to learn from. But I think that's for me is where the opportunity lies. To be honest, I'd never doubted myself as much before a challenge. Even on Everest, I had more confidence in myself. Everything seemed to be going against me. I sprained my ankle the week before I started as well. Wow. And I remember getting the train up to Glasgow and then Fort William and speaking to my good friend, Jeff Smith, another big inspiration and a great runner as well. And he just said to me, put all those doubts in a box and close it. Just close the box, man. So I tried the best I could. And what I found and what was so true that he said was that you're going to end up with much bigger problems to deal with. Funnily enough, day one, the ankle wasn't even a problem. The ankle didn't even twinge. By the end of day 2, I felt like I'd been hit by a bus. By day 3, my knees went. By day 4, it was tendonitis in my feet. By day 5, I literally couldn't run more than 10 meters at a time from the pain in my shins. And every single day, I thought it was over, but somehow the body does amazing things and adapts, and you keep on moving, and this too will pass. And even in an ultra marathon, in a marathon, the difference in mindset between mile 1 and mile 26 is unbelievable. So much can change if you keep moving. I know at some point I'll get that that decision really wrong. I mean, my biggest mistake last year was on the Bob Graham Round, which is a challenge in the Lake District, running 42 peaks in 24 hours, about 27,000 feet of climbing. That's nearly the height of Everest. I thought that I could manage that solo unsupported. I very stupidly set out in bad weather, having postponed it twice already from a cracked rib. And on the day, I got round in 27 hours. So technically, I'd failed. I completely underestimated my ability and the importance of having a support team. And I also ended up in hospital with hypothermia. So I haven't always got it right. I've got it wrong plenty more times. But that's the only way we can learn what's possible, and Rob is a great example of that. If you don't believe in yourself, then you've kind of already failed to start with. You just got to focus a day at a time.
And I think there's definitely this incredible ability of the body to sort of find something else. The number of stories I've heard from people doing stuff like these crazy ultras or crazy continual runs where they get a week in and they're like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. My body's breaking down. I've done 5 marathons in a week and I've got X thousand miles to do, but suddenly they seem to keep going. And it is almost the same with when you're marathon training as well. Your body just sort of says, well, actually, okay, you're going to keep going, so I better get used to this. So I'm going to carry on.
That was what surprised me the most. And it just defies medical logic. It really does. I mean, the 3 peaks especially, because that was going to break anybody. You can't really train for that kind of distance day after day, especially not on tarmac, or at least I know I can't. But the body does just suddenly do what it needs to do. I mean, the fact I was on day 5, I was literally hobbling, 10 meters at a time. I had to stop and walk, run for 50 miles. I saw a physio that night who gave me a proper sports massage. She taped me up, ibuprofen gel. Don't know what else she did, but then I had a hot bath. And suddenly the next day, not very quickly, but I was running again. And it just doesn't make sense, because you think that with that length, that amount of pain and damage, it's only going to get worse. Then I managed to trip down the stairs of the youth hostel I was staying in, and I strained a peroneal tendon. So then the next day I was literally hobbling down Scarford Pike. I did about 42 miles that day in the end. And one of my sponsors had emailed me telling me that I should stop because they're concerned I'm doing myself damage. I'm clearly not going to make it in the record time. And at that point, I thought, okay, this is stupid now. You've got to listen. But then part of me went back to the bullying at school and said, no chance. And then funnily enough, the next day, that pain had just disappeared. So yeah, I don't know how it does it. I have age on my side maybe as well, but one of the best things somebody ever said to me on a challenge back in Scotland a few years ago was that, the body will do whatever, the mind wants. There are limitations to that, obviously, but I think it's a good thing to live by.
100%. I guess, what would your kind of advice be then to someone listening to this going, well, this kind of sounds great, but it also sounds, as you admitted, that it's going to be a bit of torture along the way too. Why should they get involved in adventuring and running rather than perhaps, I don't know, sitting on their sofa and having a bag of crisps or something?
I think the space of both. Since COVID, I mean, obviously I've really struggled because I've barely ran at all. And so I can really empathize with anybody in the same position now. I mean, it's made me appreciate just how lucky I've been. And I'm glad it happened 2 days after the 100 miler, to be honest. But I think for me, we learn so much when we're out on the edge, when we're pushing our limits, when we're uncomfortable, and you don't have to go and climb Everest or run a marathon to get there. Even just going out for a run in the rain, choosing discomfort. I think we appreciate the comfort so much more. We learn what we're capable of. We build a resilience for everyday life. And for me, the challenges are what makes life worthwhile. It's that weird thing about type 2 and type 3 fun. You hate it at the time, but I don't know about you, but I've always come back and felt better for it. And I really miss that now at the moment. But I think it's about, setting small steps. I mean, it's taken years to get to the point when I throw myself into something as ridiculous as I do. But I started out entering a 10K in my local village. In fact, I started out running a few miles with my dad and complaining the entire way. But it's about creating that spark. And, you never know where that will lead in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years. If we set too big a step, we're probably going to sit there and keep eating crisps, which is fine. But I think we need both to really appreciate and make the most of what we're capable of.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. What's next for you?
Well, I could have told you lots of things if I wasn't still battling with COVID or the after effects, whatever it is. It's been quite a slog. So my last challenge was the Lakes, Meres and Waters, which involves running 106 miles between the 27 Lakes, Meres and Waters in the national park. That's the furthest I've ever ran. Had a brilliant time, had a brilliant support team. I learned from that one. And that was my last big run, really. That was meant to be a warm-up for an FKT in the UK this summer. But because of my current fitness and trying to get back to where I was, that's kind of looking a bit uncertain. But I'm hoping that I can enter be back in time for a 50-mile race in June, called the Kong Ultra here in the Lakes. I've never raced an ultra that length before, so I'm looking forward to that if I can get back to fitness. The Lap Ultra in Windermere in September. I've got the 50-mile Lakeland 50 in end of July, again, all being well. And Lakes in a Day in October, which again is 50 miles. So I think I'm trying to earn a few stripes in the ultra running world this year, and just to see what I'm capable of in a racing environment. Because when I'm doing these challenges on my own, I'm actually really lazy. I don't have to go fast, but I know that I'm probably capable of more, but I want to find out what I can do with the proper conditions. Next year, I've got my biggest thing planned yet, but we don't know what's going to happen with that because of illness and things. But there's plenty more to come.
Can you say what that is at the moment?
Not at the moment, just because it's still being scoped out. But it's going to be a record attempt. It's all based in the UK, all running based. And again, all my challenges are fundraising for our charity. Mind over. Here's a stammer right at the end of the interview. Mind over, mountains is trying to restore, mental health, through nature. And for me, I'm now focusing all my time into that because we've seen just how it can change lives. So we'd love people to join us on that journey.
I think that's a really good time to end. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. I can talk at length about running, and it's great to, share that with people who share the same passion. So thank you.